I just wanted to scare the hell out of people. My job is going to be to create weird shit, and I'm gonna put it into as many forms as I possibly can. People are gonna love it. Sometimes they're gonna hate it other times, but I don't care because it's gonna be my babies.
He brings great darkness, and he brings great light. Ladies and gentlemen, one is proud to present the Scarlet Letters Award to Clive Barker.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I've always been somebody who liked to do a lot of different kinds of things. I've made movies in my life, and I've written plays, and I've painted pictures and written books. I don't think of myself as being any one of those things. A writer, a painter, a filmmaker. I think of myself as being an imaginer, somebody who imagines for a profession. My heroes are people like Jean Cocteau, who was a filmmaker and a novelist and a dramatist and an artist and a poet and all-around show-off. It was people like that that I encountered as a young man. I come from Liverpool. It's a tough working class environment. My father worked in a place that made cables. I was a nervous kid. I was a kind of kid who found it very easy to imagine the worst, which I think is good in a horror writer. You've got to be able to figure out the terrible things that are just waiting around the corner. When I think of the things which scared me as a kid, 2 houses down from me, a kid committed a murder when I was 8 or 9. That was terrifying because I knew the kid, and he wasn't that much older than I was. Those things are the things that I remember as an adult now. None of the traditional Gothic images, castles and thunderstorms, even none of that stuff really gooses me. It's really the stuff of cities and regular urban environments that chill me. I had a father who thought that the stuff that came out of my imagination was pretty twisted up, which was actually good for me in a way because it made me very defiant. It made me very defiant about the kind of material that I was determined to make. If I was going to scare people, I was really going to scare people. If it was going to be sexy, it was going to be very sexy. If it was going to be fantastical, then I was going to blow people's minds. I would always be in some way or other a maker of extreme things.
What's the matter, Trevor? Scared of something?
Through my 20s, I was a man who didn't know what he was going to do. I was writing for the theater, enjoying writing for the theater. This is in London, not making any money from it, but having a good time, had my own company. And the experience of writing for the theater really made me think hard about the kinds of effects I wanted to have on people. Out of that came a desire to write some short stories. And I wrote a collection, or a number of stories that I gave to my agent, and they initially became something called the Books of Blood. They came out first in England, and were, nobody took any notice of them. They were a collection of short stories. Three books of short stories that came out at the same time. And then Stephen King said some very nice things about them, extraordinarily nice things about them, and suddenly people were paying attention. I did 6 volumes, and by that time, I was beginning to get a sense of, I don't want to be pretentious about this, the metafiction. Writing a piece of horror fiction, which is also about horror fiction, became interesting. When I came to start to write, which is in my early 30s, I found I had a lot of things I wanted to tell. Because over the years, I listened closely to people exchanging these kinds of tales. There's something very pleasurable about being scared. Very pleasurable. I think the function of them is to do with taboo. It's to do with repressed material. Julia Kristeva, the French philosopher, talks about as stuff which has been thrown out of the culture, abandoned. These subjects, murder, violent death of every kind, madness, uncontrolled sexuality, need to go somewhere because they are the part of what it is to be human. A regrettable part of what it is to be human, but nevertheless a part of what it is to be human.
They chased Candyman through the town to Cabrini Green. where they proceeded to saw off his right hand with a rusty blade.
The question is, well, what do you do with those subjects? You can't talk about them over dinner, but there's a need to somehow or other express them.
Split her open with his hook and then kill the baby too.
One of the ways that I think we do that is in story situations. The way storytelling is presented around the world, of course, there are all kinds of regional differences which are connected to geography, which are connected to climate. I'm perfectly certain that the way an Eskimo scares you is not going to be quite the same way that you're going to scare me. There's also a great commonality here. People tell these stories because they need to tell the same basic issues. They need to address the same concerns. The first movie I ever made, a little monster movie made in the corner of my bedroom, which was an animated movie made with plasticine and my action man when I was about 13. I made a movie using the story of Salome, a little 8 or 9 minute picture, which I made when I was 17 or 18 in black and white on 8mm, which actually starred as King Herod, who was, of course, the man who orders finally the death of Salome. Doug Bradley, who later goes on to play Pinhead in the Hellraiser movies. And I then did a 15-minute movie when I was about 20 called The Forbidden, with the same title as the underlying story from Candyman, which was my very, very twisted up version of the Faust legend. The first movie was Hellraiser through accident. It was me sitting down with a man called Christopher Figg who wanted to produce a picture. I said to him, Chris, how much money do you think they might give to somebody who's never really directed a movie? I'd made these things on 8mm and 16mm. And he said, well, you've had success with the books. Let's assume that they'll give us $1 million. They actually gave us $900,000 to make the first Hellraiser movie. I was at that point writing a novella called The Hellbound Heart. And I said, I think this might have what we need. It might be the kind of material that we could develop into a very modest scale movie. And we'll cast my pals who were in the theater company with me. He had a lot of friends that he'd worked with. That was the marvelous thing that was going on in this whole experience. I knew nothing about making movies. I had done some theater. I was 30 or whatever it was. Hellraiser is absolutely dominated by the notion that forbidden love will lead to some darn strange places. The real pleasure comes, and it's certainly true of Hellraiser, realizing that you're reaching people in all kinds of ways you would never reach people otherwise. For a short time, you could go to clubs and see my own character, Pinhead, from the Hellraiser movies, being represented by fetishists. There are, I'm sure, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who would never have read my books if I hadn't made that movie. It was a hello, this is Clive Barker movie. I'll always be the guy who made Hellraiser. I made Nightbreed after Hellraiser, which was a very troubled movie. Even though it's a movie I actually kind of like, it was a mess for all kinds of reasons that are nothing to do with the talents that were involved. I was naive and out of my depth, I think, in many ways. The third and last movie is Lord of Illusions. I say last movie, I might make some more movies. I've been enjoying producing, and I will certainly continue to do that in helping to produce Gods and Monsters for Bill Condon, for having my hands on Candyman for Bernard. I hope that one of the things I was able to do was be the kind of producer I would want were I directing this movie. Now I'm at the place where I feel as though there's always going to be a body of people who are going to like what I do, and there's always going to be a probably larger body of people who don't. And as long as I am loved with passion, I can bear to be hated with passion too.